Okay, my name is Bernie Kotlier, and I'm the moderator of this panel. And the panel has a sort of long title. It is Why Skill Standards and Certification Matter to Both the Energy Community and the Workforce Community. I guess that's a question. And for those of you, was everybody here for our presentation on CalCTP? Is there anybody who wasn't here for our presentation on CalCTP? Well, normally I do an introduction as a moderator about why certification is important or why we should be addressing this question. But considering the fact that we talked extensively today about certification and the importance of certification and the advantages of certification, if I say any more, I'll be cutting into the presentations of our panelists. Our panelists today are Sarah White from the Center on Wisconsin Strategy, Marcy Drummond, who's with us from the Los Angeles Trade Technical College, otherwise known as Trade Tech, and Jim Hussey from Marina Mechanical. And if you're interested in their bios, they're here in the program. I won't take time to read them because we want to get into the substance of the program. We're going to start with Sarah White, who's going to talk to us first. Sarah, it's yours.
Okay, well, this is great. It's always hard to do sort of the theater seating with a small group. I feel like we should just pull the chairs into a circle, but I guess we'll pretend we're grown-ups and use slides and so on. So look, I came here from Wisconsin via Atlanta, and it's been a long journey. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about certifications, greener skills. I have the feeling, I was saying to Marcy this morning, that it's all been said, right? So we can kind of pack up and go home and just start doing the work. But I think we'll take a little time, because I also want to hear from you about some of the things you think about what we heard this morning. This is who I am. I work for something called the Center on Wisconsin Strategy. We're known as COWS. We work on high road economic policy nationally, regionally, and in Wisconsin. We're a think and do tank. We have worked at the intersection of clean energy policy, workforce development, and good jobs for a long, long time, a couple decades. We bring together government, labor unions, the public workforce sector, community colleges, community-based organizations. We set up projects, we test them, we write about them. We were involved in founding the Apollo Alliance, the Emerald Cities Collaborative, and any number of other projects that I'm welcome to discuss with you afterwards. I think one of the reasons I'm here is that we, a few years ago, wrote a major report called Greener Pathways, which some of you may have seen, and now it seems like old hat, right? But at the time, it was really one of the first attempts to explain the language of two worlds that we're talking about today to one another, right? So we took the worlds of workforce and the worlds of green, and we translated for each other. And we also called those the worlds of those who really cared about screwed workers and the people who cared about the screwed planet, and we helped them figure out how they could work together to improve the lots of both. With greener skills, and this is a report that was handed out in your packets. It came out close to a year ago now, and some of the material is dated, but I think the arguments in it are still valid. We decided we need to go a little bit more deeper and take a technical look at this. So if you look at the workforce side of things, and many of you are already familiar with this, but we find that, and as the preliminary research from Carol's team shows, that we have a messy and really highly imperfect system, one that is failing businesses and failing workers, and particularly at the low end of the labor market is itself divided. You know, we have educational institutions, we have a public workforce system, we have a labor and apprenticeship system, we have community-based job training. Again, we saw this morning an impressive list of organizations that the researchers have been working on for the past year simply to identify, much less align the data between them. And so what we set out to do, and what I think the challenge for all of us really is, how do we resolve the tension between this incredibly localized, fragmented, dysfunctional system, one of the things we could do is set up a system of national skill standards and certifications that would really organize this the way that other countries do. That really makes sense, right? But that really pushes hard against the traditions in this country, which argue for local control, and there's a lot of really exciting innovation that comes out of local. So how do we bridge that gap? I mean, those of you who work in the labor movement, you deal with this all the time, right? Locals and internationals. Those of you who work in any kind of institution understand this pressure between the sort of disaggregated local and the national, but really solving that problem at a time where we have economic and environmental crises that are just really threatening us, I think is pretty crucial. On the green side, I think I don't even need to mention the divisions within this, but we have this real amalgam of jobs and skills and policies and training approaches, and over the past 2 to 4 years, an amazing, amazing upswelling of new green skills and green credentials, at least they were identified as such. And we said, not only do we need to rationalize the system of job training, but we need to figure out what's out there, very much of the sort of thing that California is trying to do right now. Both of these issues are linked through this sort of sticky question of credentialing and certification. I do want to say a couple words on, a quick word on green. In the past few years, between the times we wrote the first report and the second report, something happened, this incredible thing happened, which is that people got it, right? But people got it and ran with it without thinking, clearly. So we went from no green jobs to everything's a green job. And we do believe, actually, I should say, that all jobs can and should be greener, that there's not a separate set of green jobs that were delivered from, the Martian ship that look different than anything we know. But that's another conversation, and I think, fortunately, the people in this room are past that. But the workforce community, the education and training folks said, this is great, there's these new green jobs, we are going to set up green training without really understanding what that meant, without always really connecting to the demand side where the jobs were. And the Greens on their side said, this is great, you've taught us the language of education and training, and we are going to build a new green workforce development system. Both of these approaches had problems. Aside from their admirable enthusiasm. Our report and the work of many people in this room also have simply said, it's all the same thing, right? That's not a very helpful analytical category, all the same thing. But we did say that, look, there's no such thing as a green workforce development system. There's a workforce development system. It is highly imperfect. It is challenged. But we do have a green moment that we can use to help us resolve some of these issues that we have been working with on the education and training side for some 30 years. We know how to solve them. We know what it takes. Let's bring some of those answers to bear, and let's not, in fact, reinvent the wheel. I'm not even going to talk about the many debates about green and greener skills, but I do need to say a quick word about demand. And actually, the nice thing about being here is that I probably don't have to say this, but I feel like I've been a naysayer. For the past year, I've gotten up in front of groups concerned about green jobs and green training, and I've had to say, there's this dirty little secret called the demand side. And I work with labor economists. I'm not one, but some of my best friends are labor economists, and they have told me 3 truths about the economy, and that is the following. There are no jobs, there are really no jobs, and there's not going to be any more jobs for a really, really long time, right? That's the economics of the demand side. I think that the data that Carol's team showed this morning should put that in pretty stark relief. Now, that does not mean that we don't need to fix the supply side, and that doesn't mean that in many cases there is a mismatch between skills and demand, and we do need to train some folks for the jobs that we have, but it does mean we have to be really careful when we're rushing to train people for so-called green jobs. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in terms of credentials. Credentialing, another thing, credentialing is the new green. I have been to more meetings about credentialing in the past 9 months. I mean, in Washington, the Departments of Education and Energy and Labor are convulsed with the definition of credentialing and credit bearing and data quality, and as well as people at the local level everywhere. So I think we need to come back to basics, and it doesn't hurt to say, we heard a lot from the Lighting Partnership this morning, which was fascinating to me, and a great example, talking about how credentials can really drive some high road industry development. But I think it's also important to remember that developing some common standards and conferring some commonly recognized certificates for occupational skills really helps workers, right, first and foremost. It provides labor market mobility. And it provides bargaining power and hopefully higher wages. In that way, we can help drive the high road even when it doesn't come voluntarily to the marketplace. For employers, you know, it gives you some assurance that the job applicants have the skills they say they do. For consumers, it also provides critical information on the quality of work that they're going to get. I think also, particularly in energy efficiency, it really guarantees all stakeholders, and I include the planet here as a stakeholder, right, that you're going to get a return on investment. We heard here, I mean, again, another dirty little secret that seems to be very open in California, but nobody else in the country is talking about, is the really crappy quality of work in a lot of home energy upgrades. And really, I mean, just shocking. So the taxpayers also here would be a stakeholder. So we all agree that, you know, credentials a good thing, but I think it's important to remember when you start peeling back the surface that all credentials are not in fact created equal, and that they have to have certain qualities, right? They seem obvious, but not everybody gets this. First of all, they have to pay off in the labor market. You train somebody, they get a piece of paper that says they're good, but unless that's meaningful to employers, it doesn't matter, right? They have to be transparent. People need to know how to get them and how to earn them. And if possible, they should be embedded or integrated into a pathway so they're connected to the next set of credentials, or they're connected to a decent job, or they're connected to advancement in the labor market. That they should be standardized so they reflect common measures of competence, and they should be portable, right? There's a lot of certificates out there and diplomas and other things that are tied to a very particular employer or a single institution. That might be good for a particular job at a particular place in time, but does not carry across industries and across regions. It does seem obvious, I know, and I'm almost embarrassed to talk about such common sense, but it really isn't, because here is what this looks like in practice. I had several graduate students spend the better part of a year trying to sort out the marketplace of credentials. 2 of them left. One stayed, and what we did is we drew some lessons. We stopped trying to catalog the crazy almanac of credentialing. I should say that the Department of Education also has stopped trying to catalog this, and they have many more resources at their disposal than I do. But we have this array of certificates and diplomas and degrees that are not aligned, they're not integrated across institutions or industries. And everyone, it seems, especially in potentially green areas, over the past 2 years hung out a shingle and said, like, good, come, pay me, get a certificate, now you're certified to do the work. That's okay in some places, not great for workers, not great for industry, and in renewable energy and energy efficiency, because of job quality issues, work quality issues, it's a disaster, right? Because, well, for a lot of reasons, but not least because of the loss of public confidence aside and in addition to public safety issues. I think it's important to say, and I think this morning we heard again a little bit about the importance of language, and the language is really different by institution and industry, but certificates are things that you earn for going to class for a while and saying that you've spent a certain amount of time studying something. And maybe mastered it at a point in time. A certification, at least technically, for the people who sort of work in the personnel certification area, is something that is offered by a third-party institution, right? And the best of them, to my opinion, you can train for anywhere. You could be in a JATC, you could be in a community college, you could be in your basement with some stuff you got off the internet, but if you can pass the test, and if you can, however it is, achieve those competencies, then you can be certified by an impartial, neutral third party. There are some of these out there, and those are the things that we've outlined in our report, although the catalog of sort of clean energy, energy efficiency certifications that are in there is a bit dated already because it's a field that's changing pretty rapidly, but there's not that many that are national and third party. And the thing that we find about them is that they're pretty much at the high end, and that's important. That matters, but if you're worried about people accessing and entering the labor market at the lower rungs, it's kind of a problem because it's a really high bar. Now, some people have argued that you should lower the bar. Things like the manufacturing skill standards, oh goodness, I have to talk much faster. Manufacturing skill standards or the national, the solar certifications, they're at a high place because the skill demands are high. We have argued that you need to rationalize the labor market and the training systems at all levels. So don't lower the bar, but build, better, more organized, more transparent rungs up to those bars, and certify people every stage of the way. So after all this research, we came up with a national skills agenda. It's pretty ambitious. It has lots of sort of quasi-radical stuff in it. It's good for firms, it's good for workers. I'm not going to go into the details of it here, except I think that I would like to, hopefully, in a few minutes after we've all talked, we can talk a little bit more about how certifications in particular can help drive a skills agenda that can build, that can both create a skilled workforce to make us competitive and can help drive some economic development. In the report and over the years and in other forums, we have argued for a number of policy recommendations at the federal level, at the state level, at the regional level. I'm not going to talk about the state level because I think we've seen a lot of the work that's going on in California right now, and you guys are leaders on this. As for the systems, we've heard, and there are other panels that are going to talk about the ways that, in particular, registered apprenticeship and community colleges can do a better job working together and aligning themselves to train folks such as they can. I thought a really important piece that came out that I should just say this morning, I think you all get it, but I hear over and over again something that people don't get, which is that you don't have apprenticeships if there aren't any jobs, right? Apprenticeship isn't just going and like learning stuff, it's learning while you work. So if there isn't, in fact, a job out there, you are not apprenticed. So that's something else to think about. But I will say that I was going to talk a little bit about the federal work that's going on right now out of the Department of Energy. There's also on the home performance standards that are coming out of DOL and the apprenticeship side of things. But the Department of Energy right now, and we can talk about this perhaps in our discussion if you want to ask questions about it, are setting up, and it's out for public comment right now, a series of national skill guidelines. The federal government can't do standards because they get into all kinds of trouble. That appears to be dictating to industry. A set of skill standards for residential home energy upgrades. Setting up a standard isn't that hard. It takes a lot of labor. What's really hard is the assessment and setting up a national certification architecture. The Department of Energy is working on doing that right now. I'd be curious to get your feedback on the ways in which that makes sense or not. And let's talk about that after we hear from everyone else, and I will stop for now. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. It's excellent. Okay, our next panelist is Marcy Drummond from LA Trade Tech. You have your 15 minutes of fame.
My 15 minutes of fame. And I have no idea where my PowerPoint is. Sorry. Let's just see if
this doesn't come out of your time, Marcy.
Okay. Do any of these look familiar? No, it has my name on it. What session? Do you know what session we are? What session? 1A? 1A. There we go. That one. Let's just leave that open. There we go. All right. So I'm going to talk about standard certifications and such from I'm representing the workforce development community, and in particular the community colleges and how they're important to our work. But before I get into that, I'd like to let you know a little bit more about the college that I represent, so it kind of puts our work into context. Our primary service area is South Los Angeles community, and it's one of the highest risk communities in the nation. Actually, for those of you who know about census data, they talk in terms of PUMAs, and it's the most at-risk PUMA in the whole United States in terms of risk indicators like low birth weights, college-going rates, participation in higher education by adults. I mean, almost on all those indicators, we are the most at-risk PUMA in the whole United States that we serve. We also, our student body is about 30,000 students annually, so we're quite large. However, almost 70% of our students are part-time. So for those of you who are in education and you know the education lingo, we have about 12,000 full-time equivalent students, but there's 30,000 people on our campus, but they're mostly coming part-time. In that South Los Angeles service area where we draw most of our students from, there's a very low academic history of the adult population. More than half do not possess a high school diploma. 35% have less than a 9th grade education. And this is the typical adult college-going age range that I'm talking about. There's no or very low college-going culture in the area. Only 35% enroll in a post-secondary education institution anywhere. A couple years ago, we were looking at the college and our enrollments were dramatically declining. And so we did a lot of research and we went into the community and we said, you know, is it trade tech? Is it, you know, and we knew we did have some things, you know, we needed to re-engineer many of our programs and bring them up to date. But what we found out that was very shocking to us wasn't that they were choosing to go somewhere else. They weren't going anywhere. They just were not participating at all in any sort of formal post-secondary education, including apprenticeship programs, you name it. They just were, there was no culture of going beyond high school or even finishing high school in some cases. Very limited English-speaking adult population, and then just a real lack of preparation of all of our incoming students. You can see nearly all of our students come in testing into remedial mathematics and remedial English, and many levels below. We're not talking like one level below college level math or English. We're talking several very, very underprepared. 23% have less than a 12th grade education. Actually, in that population of less than a 12th grade grade education, the actual average is 8th grade in that category. And then most of them are not even there to get a certificate or degree. They just want to get however long it takes to get the skills necessary to get employed. And so they have very short-term, immediate goals and needs. So that's the kind of the context in which the work is that we're doing. And now I'm jumping to why skills are important, even giving that, because we were talking about earlier today, I think one of the messages I heard loud and clear is how do we raise up the low and underserved population, which is you know, definitely who we serve, into these higher skilled, higher paying occupations. And so that's what we're trying to do. And skill standards plays a very, very important role in trying to do that. And what does it do for us? First of all, it provides parameters for us as we're starting to develop our programs and our curriculum as to what those learning outcomes should be. So it gives us a target when we're trying to prepare this population. You know, when we know where we're bringing them from, this tells us where we need to take them to. It also establishes a mechanism for standardizing programs from region to region or even within the region. So how, you know, this training program and that training program can greatly differ. You know, this one can take 40 hours, this one can take 5 hours, but if we start talking in terms of getting people to a certain skill standard, that's where we start to level and to make we start to standardize the programs more. And then it enables us to do that. It also serves as a quality indicator by which we can measure the effectiveness of programs. So if it's taking you, if a student comes in or an individual comes in and they go through your training or education program, and at the end they can't meet that credential, then there's something wrong with your training program. You need to go back and assess why you're not getting them to that standard or to that level. Without that indicator by which to gauge how effective we're doing, we have no way of knowing how effective we are or are not doing. On the other side, it also enables the student to make informed choices about which program and which pathway to choose. You know, if I go over here and I spend this much time and this much money and I don't get a credential that the industry recognizes and I go here, so it enables them to make informed choices. But it also, what we're finding with a lot of our students, they have very mismatched expectations. They think this stuff could happen, that they should be able to get in and out in a week. You know, for having absolutely no skills, very low math and English capacity, and I want to come for a week, and I want to go out, and I want to be a solar installer. So sometimes having information about the skill standards, and this is what it is, and giving them some examples of some of the calculations they're going to be required to do, you know, helps them say, ooh, this is a lot tougher, and it is going to take a little longer, and I have to kind of plan a little bit better about how I'm going to get through the program. It also, for those employers who really do recognize a certain credential, it sends, oftentimes employers don't know, so you got a certificate from Trade Tech in XYZ. They do not know what that means. They don't know, was there math involved? Did they know safety? Did they ever use a hand tool? Did they, you have no way of knowing when you look at a student's transcript what that means. But with a credential or an industry recognized certificate, you know what that means. So a lot of our students come to us and they want that college certificate. And what that means to them is it's a sense of pride for them. It has a lot of meaning to them. So we do both. We give them a college certificate and an industry recognized certificate so that they have the sense of pride, because for many of them, this is the first time they will ever have gotten something in their family from a college. So that's very important for the culture and all of that. But what's really important for their employment is this other one. So we've got to give them both. And then it also enables job seeker employer matching at the end. If we know an employer is looking for somebody with a specific credential and we've been able to get them, we have the ability to match people more easily and more effectively. So, having said all that, how at Trade Tech do we use all this, right? And I have two handouts, and I think some came in late, so you might not have the handout. We use skill standards a lot in our work. The blue, the one that's all in blue, it's front to back, is how we go about designing all of our programs and our curriculum and our courses. And we start with, before we sit down to even say, are we going to develop a new course or a new program or re-engineer an existing course to meet industry needs, we gather a lot of data first. And at the very beginning, that's all the data we gather. And you can see on that list, we gather industry recognized certifications and standards. So we start with that. Then after that, we actually map out all the careers that are on a pathway. We gather that. And then at the bottom, I gave you on the first slide, I gave you an example of, for a crew chief, what are some of the common industry recognized certifications or standards a crew chief in this pathway would need, as just an example. Then we turn it over on the back. So for every occupation that's in this map here, these pathway maps, we use the competency model framework from the Department of Labor. We take all those skill standards and all those things that are set up, and we put it in this framework. Then we find the most common denominator. And then we start to build our program based on that most common denominators. And you can see for every program we start with what we call a fundamental certificate program, and that starts with all those skills that are at the bottom of the pyramid and the certifications that you can get if you get those skills. And then we add core technical certificate, and you start moving more and more up that pyramid. As they get their advanced technical certificate, they're moving towards the top where they're getting more management skills and supervision skills. That's where they get into learning codes and that sort of thing. And then they add their general education requirements, and now they have an AA or AS degree. So that's how we use standards and how we develop our work. On the other handout that I gave you is an example of what we've done using this design principles in the energy efficiency, renewable energy area. So basically what you see is kind of on this side of this thing is the typical occupations again in that pathway. What are the skills as we're moving up that pyramid again? What are the common skills that are needed in each of these occupations as you move up the career ladder? And then what are the most common certifications? And I say it this way because there's still a lot of unknowns. Which way is the industry going to go? There's still, so in some cases you'll see in the little box for the occupation we've listed several. That's a mystery right now to us, so we're watching all of them and trying to, it's kind of, I'm going to date myself, but I always say it's kind of like the Betamax and the VCR. Which one's going to, so we just keep watching, and if it becomes the VCR, that's the direction we're going to go. So in some of these areas, we're kind of watching what seem to be the most common certifications until one rises to the top as being the one or one of the two. And so that on that side, it shows you the career pathway, and then on this side, it shows you how we've stacked all these training programs so that at each level, they're supposed to match up. So for the weatherization installer, they can go through this amount of training, and then they're prepared to be that entry-level weatherization installer. And you can see it's also designed to be a pre-apprenticeship program. So at that point, that person can either go over and work in a utility-sponsored training or an apprenticeship program, or if they want to continue on and get a certificate and a degree, what it looks like if they go on. If they go on and they start to do college-level work and get into the certificate and degree program, on the back of this sheet, I've given you an example of what one of our stackable certificate and degree programs looks like. So you can see they all start in the yellow box. They all start with that fundamentals certificate, and I see Tom Kohano here, and Tom, because of you, we make them take algebra in the fundamentals certificate. Thank you, Tom, because my faculty were fighting with me on that. They said, no, they shouldn't have to do it till they get up to the advanced level. And Tom said, no, they need to have algebra at that level, so we have algebra in our fundamentals certificate. So we listen to you. So everybody does the fundamentals. So we're building this big pipeline at that level. Then they start to choose where they want to specialize. Do they want to go into solar thermal, solar PV, energy efficiency? And actually, this pathway also moves over to the energy generation side, so they can go into the electrical distribution. You don't see that, but there's this fundamentals feeds multiple programs. So when we talk about the fear of there not being a lot of jobs there in that little niche, we've tried to design them so people have options and that their skills transfer over to the other options. And you can see, thank you, I'm almost done. You can see the blue areas are the core technical certificates. Remember my little bubbles a minute ago where we start with the fundamentals? Then we have the core technical. So all those blue certificates are the core technical certificates. On this side, the orange is the advanced. And you can see you can get more into supervision. This is where they're getting their code. They're also picking up more advanced technical skills on the solar side if they chose solar. And on the energy efficiency side, they go more into energy auditing and things like that. And then they add the general liberal arts requirements, which is the light blue box, and now they've got the AS degree. And we've block articulated all of these programs to several of the CSUs and the UCs in the state. And basically, I think I just told you everything you see here, except for the last thing about the standards. We also use, in each one of these programs, we use that standard or that credential as the capstone evaluation. So it's the last thing the student does to get that certificate, is they do that. They take the test or the field test or whatever it is that's required to get that credential or that certificate or whatever it is, okay? So in terms of policies, because about standards, how they help us and how they assist us. I'm going to repeat, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. They tell us which skills, when we're building this competency framework, it sends a signal to us what we should put in there to build our programs around. Without some sort of signal about what's important in these skills or standards, it's hard to develop a training program. We don't know which way to go. Should we focus in weatherization, should we focus on energy efficiency measures? Or do we focus more on the actual installation of windows and attic insulation? So it gives us some guidance as to what we need to focus on. Again, it levels the playing field and provides more standardization between programs. It establishes those quality benchmarks, and it reduces ambiguity for us. That whole thing about the Betamax or the VCR, the more those standards are articulated and decided by industry, and people who know this, what is needed, the less ambiguity it creates for us who are trying to get people trained for those. Also, when we're looking at trying to really train a low-skilled, underprepared population for these, what you don't see on here is we've had to develop, even below these stackable certificate degrees, we've had to develop even other little prep programs that are even getting them prepared to be successful once they enter this pathway. So below this, what you don't see are some prep programs where we focus on real fundamental skills. We do a little safety, we do some hand tools. We also really focus mostly on math and English, but we're contextualizing it. So we're doing it with examples from construction or from energy efficiency or from solar so that they're learning some of those principles along the way. That's it for me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcy. I feel so fortunate. Our panelists are just perfectly timed. I don't know how they do that. I don't even have to be the bad guy. Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Sarah. Jim Hussey is our third panelist, not least, although last, yeah, but sometimes last for best, and he represents Marina Mechanical.
Perfect, that's it. Well, that's yeah, great. Thank you. All right, so I'm the employer in the group. Marina Mechanical is in the energy efficiency business in the commercial market. So we employ folks that go through these training programs, and I'm going to talk a little bit about training, a little bit about certification, and why it's so important to have quality training, why the training is so difficult in some cases, and why we can't necessarily transfer all this information and all this knowledge in a simple 2-week training program. So there's supposed to be a picture of a light bulb up there. Well, there you go. So there's supposed to be a picture of a light bulb, and the idea was I came up with this epiphany a couple of weeks ago. Why this business is so difficult. Because if you look at an illuminated light bulb, you look at a building, you can see a watt. You can see energy being consumed in that building. But when you look at a home, can you see the heat that's being wasted?
Not unless you have thermal imagery, right?
Not unless you have thermal imagery. And that's the point, is that we have to help the individuals that are going to work in this trade develop the skills to see what can only be seen with that thermal camera. So unless we can somehow or another give people infrared vision, we're going to have to teach them how heat transfer works, how we stop heat from entering buildings, how we mechanically move that heat around, and they have to be able to grasp those concepts in order to implement the strategies that are going to reduce the energy savings. So this is the reason that training is so important, and this is the reason that we view HVAC and energy efficiency jobs as high-tech jobs. This is a partial skill set of what we look for in an individual to do this type of work, and it takes a long time to pass this information on. And this list is the primary reason that Marina Mechanical decided to become a union contractor 10 years ago. I started in this business in 1980, and I operated for those first 20 years as a non-union contractor, and I spent most of that time trying to get the contractors around me to come together and support training. And after 20 years of very hard work, it didn't pan out. Most of the contractors that I talked to were not willing to support training because when it was good times, they were too busy. They couldn't afford to be without a crew to do the work. In bad times, they couldn't afford to be paying for training. There's also this argument that constantly went on about, do we train them on our time or their time? If we're going to train them on our time, do we pay them? If they're on their time, do we pay them overtime? And a lot of discussion about people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. I got very frustrated with that whole concept because I knew if we were going to move forward, we had to have a method to train young people and bring people into the industry. What we were doing was we were stealing skilled employees from one another. And so all we did was hire somebody away from a competitor for a couple dollars an hour more, raise our labor cost, and then create this shrinking pool of skilled individuals. I became very frustrated, and I began to look around, and as I looked around and I looked at the union apprenticeship program, I realized something. In the union apprenticeship program, the employers all made a contractual commitment to put cents per hour, dollars per hour, into a training program. So that meant if I became part of that group, I was surrounded by contractors who shared my commitment to training. That was very important to me. Also, I was able to work with a labor partner who was committed to training. And if I got involved in the JAC, I had the opportunity to have something to say about what that training was going to look like. So I could look at journeyman upgrade classes, I could look at classes for new individuals. So today, in addition to teaching many of the traditional skills of the trade, we're also teaching members building information modeling. So we now have technicians who are actually constructing HVAC systems in 3D models before we ever actually fabricate and put them on the job. All of these skill sets we're teaching in our training programs because we have the infrastructure, we have everything there, and then as a contributing employer, I can have something to say about what that curriculum is going to be, what we're going to teach. So as we train folks and we look at where will these jobs come from, I was listening to Ken Rosen from the Fisher Center on Real Estate and Economics. He was talking about overbuilt commercial office, overbuilt retail, overbuilt hospitality, the list goes on and on. As a construction person, the expectation that we're going to be building office space or retail in the future is not realistic. We're probably 5 to 8 years away before we ever see that type of work again. So what sort of work are we going to be doing between now and that restoration of traditional construction? We're going to rebuild everything we built in the last 40 years. And when we see legislation come along like AB 758 or 1103, we want to upgrade buildings that were constructed before Title 24, when we see the pressure now to get to zero net energy in commercial buildings by 2030, that's all work that needs to be done today. One interesting comment, most people consider the life expectancy of an HVAC system to be 25 years. So we need to be at zero net energy in commercial buildings in 2030. That's 19 years from now. So that means that the systems that we install today really should be contributing to that zero net energy goal right now. So we need to start on these goals today, and we need to be training and building a workforce that can help us install and implement those systems right now, today. That's what we need to be working on. So if our construction is going to be energy efficiency and replacing the systems that are out there, how do we drive that business? Well, the biggest reason that it's not happening is because of a lack of capital. Building owners understand the systems that they have are not only wasting energy, but they're costing a tremendous amount of money to keep them operating. So in addition to a retrofit having payback tied to its energy efficiency, you look at a 30-year-old air conditioning system that you can't get parts for and you have to hand make components to keep it running, just the maintenance cost becomes huge. And that brings the return on investment on replacing these systems down. But they can't borrow money to do these projects. They can't borrow money because the real estate has gone down in value, they don't have the equity to borrow, or they have vacancy factors, they don't have the rent that will sustain the debt. And then the other piece is energy audits and measurement and verification to validate that the projects produce results. Now, where the work is happening right now is primarily in buildings over 100,000 square feet. So in those buildings, the projects are large enough and they produce enough saving that they can afford to have an investment-grade energy audit. An investment-grade energy audit is usually done by a registered professional engineer. It costs $15,000 to $20,000 and on up, but it provides the type of documentation that a lender would go at risk. So we see projects in buildings that are 100,000 square feet and larger, but there's a whole inventory of buildings out there that are smaller, that are huge opportunities, not only for energy efficiency, but for employment for the folks that are going to do that work, that are not happening now because the building owners can't get the dollars. So, how do we free up that money? Well, one of the ideas that I think justify certification, in addition to the training, is if we come up with a certification for an energy auditor that's in that mid-sector, so that there was a believable energy audit that was something below an investment-grade audit that the lending community would still go at risk on, that would free up some capital and might make some projects go forward. Currently, to do an investment-grade audit, you need a registered professional engineer. That's an individual who's got a 4-year degree or 8 to 15 years of experience. They've gone through on-the-job training in the form of an EIT program and then license testing, and their education includes ethics curriculum, and I think that's important. Now, if we were to put together a certificate for an energy auditor, we could duplicate that, but maybe at a mid-level. Instead of a 4-year degree, perhaps a 2-year degree. Most of the apprenticeship programs will give credit towards an AA degree, and vice versa. We'll accept people coming in from junior college programs. So there's an opportunity for those two entities to work together on that. But a 5-year apprenticeship or a 2-year AA degree with that ethics curriculum, OJT. Now, our apprenticeship programs include OJT now, but in this case, 2 years, it would be specific to the auditing world and license testing that's again, tied to the energy audit piece, and then a requirement for continuing education. So why so much training? Well, my pictures I don't think are going to come up. You can't, again, you can't see a wasted watt. You can't see that BTU. But with certified training, we can build a workforce that can do credible energy audits, that the banks and the lending community would be willing to go at risk, and if they weren't willing to go at risk, perhaps the Energy Commission or the state or even the training agency would be willing to fund a pool to back an insurance policy so that a lender that was going to go at risk on an energy project would have some sort of a guarantee that said this energy audit that projected these cash flows is real and will work if you go at risk and do the project. So the idea is we can't train these folks to do this work in 2 weeks. It really takes a skill set that takes some specific training over a period of time. But if we do that, if we set the standards and do that, and if we consider setting specific standards for an energy auditor with a believable certificate that's credible, believable that the market will agree, then we might be able to free up some work, have some results for our training, and get people back into the marketplace. So there you go.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Well, I think our presentations have been excellent, and I really appreciate all the panel members' contributions to this panel. And we've got a lot of very interesting information that we would like to discuss and expand on. And we'd like to do that in 2 stages. First of all, we would like to have a discussion between the panel members about some questions, and then we would like to bring in all of you into that discussion as well. And we would like to have some takeaways from this discussion to present to policymakers as well. So first of all, I have some questions for the panel, and anyone can jump in. I'd like to see if we can't foster some discussion. And the first question is, how does, if at all, apprenticeship fit into the discussion of standards, certification, and credentials, which I'm just going to abbreviate to SCC, because it's easier to say. Anybody want to comment, anybody in the panel want to comment about the role, if any, of apprenticeship in this discussion?
Sure, I'll start.
Is your microphone on?
Is this on?
Can you
hear me? Okay. Well, wow. I mean, apprenticeship really is the original career pathway, right? So when we talk about certifications, when we talk about credentialing, again, here we're in issues of language and universes, but to us, when we think about it, I mean, getting a journey card is one of a whole series of different kinds of credentials that have meaning in the labor market because of the way that the registered apprenticeship system is set up. I mean, that's something that's understood by industry. It's just a given that, you know, for the most part, we know how that works. Now, there's all kinds of issues about how you might get there and how that pays off and access and so on, and union density. So it's an incredibly valuable credential. I think what's interesting is if you look at sort of setting up national standards, national certifications, how to integrate that. One of the things that the Department of Energy is looking at doing, which I think is interesting, is trying to figure out a way to integrate the JATCs to look at the training that is going on at a master journey level, as well as the community-based training organizations, as well as the non-union shops. Now, is there a way to do that where everybody trains to a similar certification? That's the big question, right? I mean, a registered apprenticeship has its own system of assessment, of training, of industry partnerships, but it's only right now organizing a certain segment of the labor market. So it's a great model. The question is, how do we integrate it, expand it, and get more people into it?
So Marcy, from a community college point of view, how do you view apprenticeship in relationship to this question of standard certification and credentials?
Well, I'm just going to take a little different angle at it. I think in terms of, I think one of the messages we heard this morning is that we all need to kind of collaborate because we're all on the playing field together. So what I see it enables us to do is it enables us to really partner with apprenticeship programs, because we're all talking the same language now, because we're now not focused on the who and the how, but the what, you know. So we can sit down with our locals and we can say, where do you want us to take people on this whole ladder, from even using that competency framework, you know, take them up to tier 3 or tier 2, or we'll do this building block, you focus on that building block, you know. And it enables us to have a conversation about what role we're each going to play and getting people to that skill standard. So a lot of times they'll say to us, we just want you to focus on pre-apprenticeship, but that might mean different things to different locals or to different unions. So we can use the standards. What we mean by pre-apprenticeship is you get them to here. You get them to this point on competency and math. You get them so they can do this skill and this thing, and then we'll take it from there. So it enables us to be able to collaborate and jointly develop programs together, because we have a common language and we're all knowing where we're trying to collectively take people to and what role we each play in doing that. I know it's a different angle, but that's...
Well, no, that's great. Jim, I know you made a lot of comments about it already. Do you want to add anything to what you've said?
Yes. For me, it's an issue of credibility. In a lot of what I do, I look for the trusted third party. Who's the validator in all of this? In the case of an approved apprenticeship program, that trusted third party is the Department of Apprenticeship Standards. So that curriculum has been reviewed and approved, and I know if an individual comes to me that's gone through an apprenticeship program and they have that certificate, I know the training they've gone through, I know the grades that they had to get, I know the OJT they had to participate in, so I know what I'm getting. If they come to me from another program and just simply hand me a certificate, I don't necessarily know that. Now, I might be able to do a certain amount of research to figure it out, but other than the time that I'm at a JAC meeting and I have my training hat on about what's our curriculum, 95% of the time, I'm a business person and I'm running that business, and so I don't really have time to deal with that. I need that trusted third party to tell me this individual has these skill sets, and that's what that apprenticeship certificate means.
Thanks.
Can I just add one other thing too? I just think that, I mean, the community colleges, the technical colleges at least that I work with, have done just heroic things, right? To especially dealing with on-ramps and really challenge people. But I think that an apprenticeship has its own issues with access and persistence, right? But I think education and training in this country has completely failed poor people and working class people, with the exception of apprenticeship, right? It's hard to get in, but once you get in, it is a system that works and has worked for working people in a way that nothing else in this country has. So I think there's really not enough good to say about it.
And to piggyback on what you're saying, again, my involvement in the apprenticeship program has pointed out to me the degree to which our apprenticeship programs work with the local community colleges, and the outreach that goes on between our apprenticeship programs and the community colleges is growing and expanding on a daily basis. So I think that the future is even better for being able to open up these programs to folks that have come through the community college and folks that are looking for the opportunities that are out there in the trades.
Great, thank you, terrific. The next question we have for the panel is, how do the effects of standards, certification, and credentials, the SCC, differ for the energy efficiency community and the worker community? What would you see as the differences, if any? And how does that relate to what we should be doing in the policy arena?
Well, I guess I'll start. I would say it's an issue of definition. The credentials that we look for on the trade side of the equation are traditional, something that we're pretty comfortable with. I think the entire energy efficiency community has been struggling for a long time to try and find out what the definition for these certificates and credentials should be. When I hear 3 individuals trying to quantify this and 2 of them giving up, I'm not surprised. So if that effort to consolidate that can continue to the point that we can begin to standardize that and have clear definition on what these credentials are, then I think that value will come up. And then I'll insert in that, again, this comment about the trusted third party. Who's the trusted third party that's going to validate this?
Anybody else want to comment on that, Marcy?
Yeah, I think in terms of energy efficiency, a lot of the work that's been done to date is actually on setting the standards for the work that is done. So, and not on standards for the type of person who can do that work. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's all about, you know, we install a window to this standard, but not what kind of standards and the skills and the abilities of the people that are necessary to be able to install that window to that standard. So that's where a lot of the work is being done right now, is what does it take for an individual to be able to do this work to that standard. So, and we're actually trying to work on that too. And then, once you have that, which we are trying to work on, then how do you take these underserved, low-income populations who have never touched a tool, who you saw our population, a lot of them dropped out in the 8th grade. Now how do you get them to have those skills and abilities to be able to do the work to a certain standard? So most of the work that's been done to date is on the standard of the work that's done, not on the standard of the person who's doing the work.
That's a great distinction. I mean, I think that when we, on the education and training side, when we talk about standards, we're talking about skill standards, which is hopefully, and not everywhere, but it's a set of standards which has been, which you spend a long and expensive process going through to figure out. You talk to frontline workers, you talk to employers, you talk to industry, and you say, what are the skills needed to do this job? And then that's validated by industry. There's a whole formal process you go through, and that's a set of skill standards to which then you develop curriculum and training, and then those are marked by credentials. As you attain those skills, you get a credential saying, I've attained this many, and this many, and this many, and then at some point you can be certified also by an outside body. So there are 3 separate things that are related very much and aligned in different kinds of pathways depending on what region of the country or what industry you're in.
Okay, well, I want to make a few comments on this subject, and I wrote down a few notes. To the energy efficiency community, these standards are in many cases about efficacy, about how much energy you can save in the various areas. To the worker, first of all, the value of a certification to a great extent determines the individual's value in the marketplace. So they have a little different view of it. To the worker also, a broader, deeper, and more comprehensive credential is more diverse. A more diverse credential is a more stable credential and is likely to lead to a career as opposed to a job. And also, of course, the standards allow the worker to figure out what kind of training they need to find and what they need to train for. So I think some other interesting comparisons there. The next question is comparing the value of standards for workers and employers and how they differ. You want to take the first shot at this, Jim? Since you're the employer on the panel.
Sure. Well, you know, clearly as an employer, it's very easy for us to articulate the standards for the folks that we would employ and bring in onto our teams. I think that we're not so quick to talk about standards for the employers, in my case, contractors. I'm going to go on a limb. Personally, I think that the barrier to entry to all of these businesses is too low. No, I mean, really, to get into this business, you need a contractor's license. And a contractor's license today, you go to a contractor's license school, you learn how to pass the test, you become a contractor. At a very minimum, and I've shared this in some other forums, at a very minimum, I think that once an individual gains a contractor's license, that there should be a requirement for continuing education, and there should be a requirement for retesting. I don't think somebody should get a license for life.
Any other comments about difference between the worker and the employer in terms of standards? Okay.
I don't think you could say it any better than what you just said.
Okay. Okay. Some of the comments that I've heard in the past few weeks in our discussions about that also relate to the value of a standard to employers, and they have to do with turnover and productivity as well. And that's probably something that would be important to an employer, would you say, Jim?
Of course. And you know, for us, and I tried to speak to this earlier today, we would love to employ as many people as we possibly can. We just need to have the jobs to place these individuals. So a big portion of our effort goes into finding those opportunities. Now, once we find those opportunities and we have to man up, we don't necessarily find ourselves in a situation that we can say, okay, well, we'll bring on X number of individuals and we'll spend X amount of time training them to start a job 3 months, 5 months out. Typically, once we're awarded a contract, we have to man up and get on that job now. So that's why we need those partnerships with our apprenticeship program, with our junior colleges, the folks that are filling that pipeline. And that's why we need the standards in the training so that they know what to train to, so that when that job appears and we can open up the pipeline, that the folks that show up to do that work have the skill sets to succeed in those jobs when we put them on the jobs. Otherwise, we do find ourselves with turnover, sending people back, and that's not good for the individual that's invested in training that didn't pay off for them. It's not good for the employer that has to do, mobilization and remobilization to get people back onto the job. So that partnership in the training for me with the apprenticeship program, with the junior colleges and the other folks that are feeding into the system is critical.
Okay, the last question for the panel, and then we'll move on to broader discussion with the audience, is it appears, and I think most folks here would agree with this, that we are unlikely to meet our energy efficiency goals with the current level of standards that we have. Does anybody disagree with that? We can discuss that if anybody disagrees, but I think that's something that has been pretty much a consensus. And if that's the case, how does or would or should standard certification and credentials relate to or contribute to the development of policy for our policymakers? And this is probably the most important part of this discussion. First, the panelists, and then we'll move it to the audience. Anybody want to start?
I think sometimes we're trying to simplify a very complex situation, and I think with policy, when you're looking at the whole generating of meeting these efficiency standards, of meeting our goals in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, policy is just one piece of the pie. Also there's the economy and what's happening in the economy. There's also what's happening with technological advances and the cost of technology and the resources that are going to be needed to bring to bear into the market so that all of this is doable. So I think California has been very progressive in its policies. Where we're missing are in those other links. And the public demand. On the energy efficiency side, if we can increase the public demand, and the only way we're going to increase in public demand is people are not going to be willing to invest their own personal dollars. So right now, a lot of the demand is being generated through the low-income energy efficiency, and people are willing to do it because there's not a huge cost to them, or an opportunity cost to them. To get the general public to want to do this, they have to know that it's going to pay off for them, and they have to know that the work that's going to be done on their home is going to be quality work. And so that huge piece of demand is missing, and we're not going to be able to grow it unless there's confidence by the consumers that this work is going to pay off for them and that it's going to improve their home and in its value, in its energy efficiency, that there will be a payoff. So standards plays a big role in that because they have to have confidence in the work that's going to be done on their homes.
Industrial.
Absolutely, exactly. I'm sorry, absolutely, and that applies to the business owners that want to in large commercial operations as well.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Anybody else want to take a crack at that?
I mean, I think that gets right at it. So we know that skill standards, insofar as they drive and hopefully guarantee the quality of work done, they will boost the level of energy efficiency, right? But I don't know that workforce development, workforce training policy is the thing that's going to get us towards our clean energy targets, right? It can go a long way to helping that. I think it can do two things. It can do not only quality of work, but it can also increase job quality, hopefully, which means that it does reduce things like turnover for employers, because if you have workers who are paid decent benefits and have highly skilled jobs and they have a chance to have more training and advancement and they're happy and productive in their work, then there's not going to be the kinds of labor disputes that that so often are problematic or turnover. So increasing both quality of work and job quality is going to lift up the industry, certainly. Increasing public confidence, lift up the industry, certainly. But without massive public and private investment and sort of real political will to drive that kind of thing, I mean, I just think it's a very heavy lift to ask workforce skill standards to drive us closer to serious energy efficiency goals. It can play a big role in it, but I don't see it as the primary policy driver. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I don't see it as a primary policy driver either, but I think it is a huge critical piece.
Absolutely. No, you can't do it without it. That's
absolutely
true.
I think that when we passed AB 32, I've heard people refer to it as a BHAG, and I think in the beginning that's true. And there's phases to this where we initially look towards some sort of a huge technology gain to get us there. And in lighting, we've been able to move from incandescent to CFLs to LEDs, and we've had technology gains that have had a huge impact. But when we talk about moving heat through a building, we don't have anything out there on the horizon in the way of a huge technology gain. We're basically still using vapor compression to move heat around. There's some things with desiccants and there's some other things that are out there, but we're going to get to this goal by changing the other side of the equation. Not how we get heat out of the building, but how we prevent heat getting into the building to begin with. And that's going to be a lot of focus on the envelope. That's going to be insulation, that's going to be sealing these buildings, it's going to be building orientation, solar, windows, you name it. Now, there's a lot to be done there, and there's a lot of training and education that needs to be done to bring the workforce to the table that can address that. And the piece that's missing is the market driver, and in my opinion, the market driver is the cost of energy. Mm-hmm. And until the cost of energy gets high enough to drive people to make the investments in the envelope, we're not going to get there. But I have really high confidence that we will. When I start seeing new rate structures and I see a move towards paying for electricity based on the time of production or the time of use, that these are the sorts of things that are going to create the market pressure that will be the payoff for the training that we're trying to design and build today. So it is a BHAG, but I think we can get there. We just have to get away from, we'll sit back and wait another 5 years and see if there's a magic bullet.
Hey, at this point, it's the audience's turn, and we still have another 15 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
So I work for a small community-based job training program, energy efficiency, and we're absolutely, I work for a small community-based job training program in energy efficiency. We're absolutely in this space of trying to figure out what standards we should be aligning our curriculum with. And what we've landed on for now is BPI. And Jim, you said, you mentioned this need for a standard for auditors, and I thought that's what BPI was for, was to be this, certification standard for auditors. Marcy, I saw in your framework, you address it a little bit, although it doesn't look like your graduates come out with any kind of BPI certification. The problem for us that we've found is that it costs money. BPI is not free. It's held by, I don't know if it's a for-profit organization or a nonprofit, but it costs money, which makes it a barrier. For our low-income students, they can't get BPI certification unless they're employed by an employer who will pay for it. And so, what's the role? How do I understand, is this a standard we should be aligning ourselves with? What's the role of standards like BPI that are out there that are getting adopted and kind of built into, we adopted it because it's built into our city's energy efficiency retrofit program, and it's required of the contractors, but I don't know if you could speak to that.
BPI is a good start, and I think it's a good place for you to be. I don't think there's anything that's progressed further beyond that yet. But what I'm arguing for is a certification that's higher than what BPI has right now. I'm arguing for a certification that's high enough that a financial institution will go at risk and lend money based on the output of that audit. So, BPI is a good start, and it's a process. Here's how you conduct the audit. Here's how you do this. But what I think needs to be behind that are the skill sets and the knowledge. of why we're testing these things, why we're making these measurements, and why we're recommending these strategies. Particularly in the heating and air conditioning side of the equation, there are so many variables that come in with, you know, climate zones and structure type. I mean, there's a lot of variables, and we need to teach people the knowledge, the underlying knowledge behind that. So I would encourage you to stay with BPI, and I think that they see the need to move this forward. It's a beginning, so stay with it. But I think when we get to the end, that an individual who goes through this training program to get this certification will have a BPI certificate, but that won't be all of it.
And actually, that is the direction that we, in this diagram, I can't even read my own thing. The Energy Efficiency Certificate of Achievement, that is the certification that those individuals get at the conclusion is BPI. So that's the, yeah.
Do they get BPI building analysts?
Yes, okay. Yeah. But I agree with everything you said. We just see that kind of as, and BPI is also really watching what the U.S. Department of Energy is doing with its new standards, and they're staying abreast of that. They're part of the conversation. They know they need to have some more advance, so we're just all kind of watching it, but they're definitely the leader right now and that we see to that point, you know, and we've aligned that certificate program with that certification.
It just goes right to the heart. It goes right to the heart of all of these questions. And one reason that the Department of Energy is trying to organize this is because people just don't know. I mean, all the different training partners, even at the table, are like, well, we're not sure what to train to and who to train to. And especially, not just in the case, but especially in the case of, say, a low-income student, if you're going to try and find the money to take this, is it going to pay off? Does anybody care if I have this? Do I have to have it to get a job? Will it get me better wages? Will I not get a job because I don't have it? And one of the things you find, and the reason that we'd like there to be a system that was more organized on the skill assessment side, is that it is very expensive to set up a certification program. This is one of the reasons, for example, we find that people don't like certification programs, not just because they're expensive, and there's a reason for that, but because it's a pencil and paper test, right? Which is a barrier to a lot of people. And some people who could do it with their eyes closed in the field can't pass that test because the reading level at which it's written. And so there's all kinds of claims that it's exclusive that way. Now we could say that we need to, you know, again, we need to have a whole system of standards that are beyond that we can get people up to, but starting at that level, the problem is that doing field assessments is prohibitively expensive. You think it's expensive now to go out and test someone in the field costs, you know, 10 times more. So there's all these things that are about system development and rationalization so that the customers, whether it's a training program or a potential worker, know what the heck they're getting into and what matters to industry. And so it's sort of this larger question, too, of what's the role of government here. You ask a policy question. Now, government can't be setting standards, not skill standards in this case. I mean, that's really the job of industry, right, to say what is needed. But you certainly can have government to incent and push and lean on this to say, okay, there has to be some kind of order out there so that people know what's going on. So trying to figure out that balance and, you know, not hurt a lot of people in the meantime is kind of the job of policy right now.
But also you brought up a thing with BPI as well, is that it is getting written into a lot of policy. So you said, I think you said your city's policy is that. So that's where the policy is interlinking with the setting of the standards and the credentials. So when we see any sort of policy around a standard that's expected, it's usually BPI that's listed in that policy. So not only in your city, but in others as well.
Isaac.
Just to tie in with that, don't you think that's a problem? I've been working on, especially residential weatherization as an assignment of mine with the laborers union for almost 2 years now. Yeah. And from what I've seen is industry, whether it's the state government itself through Community Services and Development Department or the investor-owned utilities, have singled out certain training organizations, refused to recognize others, and it's actually hurt the industry because a lot of our contractors that work with us say, hey, look, I already pay you a training contribution per man hour, and now I have to go get this extra certification on top of it, which your standards either meet or exceed, and that's actually damaged the industry because a lot of our contractors are saying, until they recognize your training, we're just kind of stay out of it. Do you think, you know, especially from a contractor's perspective, do you think that's a problem? Because I know, you know, NATE isn't even recognized, which almost dumbfounds me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At least in California.
Well, again, I think this feeds back to this issue of multiple certifications. There's just so many certifications out there that hopefully this will all boil down. And as a contractor, sure, it's frustrating. The reason I chose to get involved with my JAC is that when these obstacles come up, then I go and sit down with my JAC and say, all right, how do we bring that into our journeyman upgrade training so that we can get that certificate and move on? It's going to happen. One of the things that I'm pleased about this particular event, though, is that it's bringing together all of these players. And it's important because in our field, we're doing energy audits at different levels. So we'll do an investment grade audit, but before somebody will do an investment grade audit, we'll do a mid-grade audit. Well, it doesn't cost quite as much, and you get some information before you make the decision to commit to that investment grade audit. And before we do the mid-grade audit, we do a real low-level audit. When, you know, we're looking at low-hanging fruit here and more expensive opportunities here. Well, to me, the skill set for the individual that's doing this audit versus this audit versus this audit creates an on-the-job training opportunity. So as we begin to talk to one another about how we work together and how we begin to bring people into these fields, somebody had talked earlier about you bring an individual in to a training program and they say, well, give me the information so in 2 weeks I can go out and have this job. Well, okay, we'll give you the information, and in a year you can have this job, and in 2 years you can have this job, and in 5 years you can have this job. But it's a pathway that we can work on together. The only thing I would suggest is bring to the table one other player, and that's either the building owner or the finance community that's going to put up the money to do this. So that when we talk about what type of a certificate will the lending community accept to go at risk, that they can be at the table and be part of the definition. What is it that they're looking for in that certificate? So.
Okay. Yes, sir, in the back.
Hey, Hussey. So I want to take Jim's point one step further, right, that you just made. So, wow, local workforce boards and community college programs, especially one that Marcy runs, which is fantastic, are focused, and community organizations are focused on people oftentimes with real barriers to employment, right? So you're trying to move those people out of poverty into pathways into good jobs. And then we have, as Sarah pointed out, the best job training programs in the world, been around for centuries, a century plus. Everybody recognizes that, but there's an access problem, right? But the access problem is really the fact that, Jim, you don't have enough work. Right. So how do we set up a way of picking the winners in some sense, where, Jim, we're making sure as community organizations, workforce boards, community colleges, that you're getting the contracts, and we're aligning our training programs with you, and therein lies the pathway for the folks who want to get access to good jobs. And there's formal ways of doing this, and I'm going to bring up project labor agreements with a really good, well thought out local hire provision. These things really work. And I don't know, maybe Sarah, you could, Cal's has done some great work around this stuff, so I wonder if you guys could comment on. LA, of course, has done this, pioneering work in this area.
Well, you know, first of all, I can tell you that the apprenticeship program that I'm involved with, and I assume that the other building trades are the same, have put a tremendous amount of energy into making sure that the programs are accessible and that they aren't exclusive. Through our pre-apprentice programs, we have programs that individuals can come in and take some training before they even take a pre-apprentice test so that they can have a better chance of getting into the program. And then, as I said, the outreach to the community colleges and the other training centers that are in the area. Now, in addition to that, I think that you could fine-tune the local hire agreements so that, you know, in some cases they say a percentage need to come from the community, perhaps a percentage need to come from a program within the institution that's contracting for the work. So that might be a possibility. But we have I know we have in our agreement specific language that allows for individuals to come from approved local programs specifically to meet local hire requirements. So I think it's just a matter of fine-tuning the communication.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Dan.
Just a quick one, Bernie. You talked a lot about standards for the worker, the contractor. But what we didn't talk about was the building inspector. Jim, I agree with a lot that you're saying about these standards. Time and time again, I'm coming out to projects where I'm seeing installations that are not done per code. They're incorrectly installed, and yet they've been signed off by the building and safety department. Sometimes that's because a general inspector will come out to inspect an electrical system or a mechanical system that he's not qualified to inspect. And to me, that's going to hurt this industry as we move forward with renewables, because these systems won't go online or they'll be delayed. So again, my point is just there should be standards for the building and safety departments also.
Can I just add to that? On a slide that I saw earlier today, there was something about support for the building inspector community. And it may even be a role for public goods funds in that arena. Because in my experience, building inspectors were primarily there for safety, public safety issues. And now that we want them to, in addition to public safety, be some sort of gatekeeper for energy efficiency, is a change in their role. And okay, if we're going to change that role, so be it, but let's recognize it for what it is and then provide the support. Right now, it seems to me that most inspectors want on-the-job training. It's at the expense of the city. Maybe there's a role for some outside funding for that as well.
Yeah, the projects that we're involved with, which is new, we're doing fuel cells, we're doing solar, we're doing energy storage. We're doing this all under one system. So this is new for the building and safety departments, even going in for plan check. Even the plan checkers aren't used to seeing these type of systems. And so there just needs to be some new training and some education in that area. So again, so other contractors don't compete in this market, try to do the work because they're hungry, and then they fail at it, and then it hurts the industry.
It's a really great point, because I think that a lot of the energy and focus is on installation, right? And we don't really look at the inspection as much on the development. It's also part of this, part of the question of how you maybe get at driving the high road in an industry that's not fully organized, right? And I mean, there are ways to sort of put in inspection carrots and sticks driving the selection of contractors, right? And sort of if you're a contractor that hires a certified workforce, then we'll do fewer inspections, right? That doesn't really get at sort of training the inspection force, but there's ways that you can, play with the marketplace. I mean, you can't pick winners necessarily, but there's ways that you can write in things to law and policy to try and incent the selection of high road contractors. I also think, I was just thinking about the need also to educate folks like outside of the energy efficiency community, right? Because I know that on the side of labor who's funding and could fund a lot of the training for this kind of thing. I mean, one thing I hear a lot is like, why is there all this emphasis on trying to sort out the standards for, that's weatherization, how hard can it be to do a little installation? I mean, this is the kind of thing that people outside of this field say all the time. And I mean, one of the things that I'm going to take away was this thing that, you don't, do vapor pressure physics by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? I mean, and that's how people, where did I last see that? You could do an encore career by going in and doing attic insulation as if, that was something that accountants were going to start doing. I mean, it's crazy what people think about this field outside the field. And there are people who matter in the policy and funding decisions who also somehow we need to get this message out that building science is building science, right? and that's a whole nother area of discussion, but that struck me as your slides were up there.
Well, I'd like to, I'm sorry, but we're out of time. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this panel, and I'd particularly like to thank our panel members, Sarah White and Marcy Drummond and Jim Hussey, and all of you for your participation. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a 15-minute break, and the next session will start at 2:45. Thank you.